Like most Americans, I've spent a lot of time sitting around my house thinking, wow, the US government sure looks like they're having a bunch of fun with those Patriot missiles. I bet I could build one. So I did. Hey there, if you're new here, my name is Braden Carlson. You're watching a Rocket Vlogs video, and this is a YouTube channel where we build and fly high-powered rockets. So without further ado, I'm just going to dive straight into it. Here's the build of my roughly 1/3 scale Patriot missile. For my build, I'm using a now discontinued 5.5-inch diameter composite warehouse fiberglass Patriot kit. It's a really cool kit because unlike most kits, it uses the scale fin size. And the reason most kits don't use them is because they're really small and they make for sort of an inherently unstable rocket. On the real Patriot, the fins move to control it. On high-power rocket models, they don't do that. Usually. Not here anyway. Around here, we do dumb rockets. The former manufacturer of these kits sort of had a notoriety for the parts being a bit ill-fitting, and this one was no exception. The centering rings and bulk plates were all wedged into a small piece of airframe known as the switch band, and it required a little bit of brute force to get those out. First thing we need to do is glue the centering rings to the motor tube, and those should just fit nicely, right? No, it required a good amount of sanding, but I really like these sanding drums that you can get at Harbor Freight. You just chuck them up in a brushless drill, or a brush drill, that works too, and it kind of just blows right through the material. Now remember, when we're working with fiberglass, I'm always wearing a KN95 mask or a full-blown respirator. Fiberglass in your lungs is a very bad thing, and you definitely don't want that. With fitting the rings out of the way, it's time to start gluing stuff, right? Wrong, and if you know my channel, you know what time it is. Folks, welcome back to the sanding channel. I glued the bottom centering ring flush to the motor tube with CA and then used that same sanding drum to notch out a spot in the top ring to pass a 1-inch Kevlar strap through that I'll be gluing to the motor tube to act as my shock cord anchor. Now the kit came with 3 centering rings, but I'm only going to use 2 because it's not really necessary to have 3. It's a really short motor tube, and with these tiny fins, we don't want to be adding any extra weight to the back of the rocket. It's the worst place you could add the weight. The rocket's pretty short, fins are pretty small, and for that reason as well, I'm not doing internal fillets. And if you're familiar with my channel, you also know that I go back and forth on whether I'm a fan of internal fillets, but for the sake of the Patriot's weight distribution, no internal fillets on this guy. So I sanded the centering rings on my belt sander until they fit inside the airframe tube, and from there I took on a step that you've not seen me do before, even if you're a regular watcher. Usually I'm not concerned about the joint between the rear ring and the motor tube because usually there's internal fillets that eventually make that all sort of one piece by way of a composite bond. But since there's no internal fillets, I marked out all the spots on the rear centering ring where the fins are going to be so that I can put a fillet from the ring to the motor tube everywhere the fins won't be. It's just a little bit of added security, make sure that bond is nice and strong because this is a 75mm motor mount and you can get some pretty nasty powerful motors in 75mm. Another way you can achieve basically the same thing is to put a full fillet around that bottom ring and then notch the rear of the fin tabs to clear them, but I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to do this instead. I don't really have an explanation as to why. Because of this technique, I had to draw lines on the rear centering ring where the gaps were for the fins so that I could align them with the fin slots in the airframe tube when I glue it in place. If I misalign this, then that means I'm gonna wind up notching the fin tabs anyway because there'll be a fillet there. We don't want that, so drawing lines on the back ring was a safe insurance way to make sure that everything is lined up once I start gluing the motor mount assembly into the rocket. Now you can see I tied a knot in my Kevlar shock cord below the top centering ring even though it was all getting glued to the motor tube. I had a shock cord anchor rip out of a rocket this very year, so I really like putting the knot in there if there's room between the motor tube and the airframe tube, just to make sure that it's, you know, even if all the epoxy somehow manages to fail, we would still have to pull that knot through the tiny slot in the top center ring between the motor tube, and it's just not a very likely scenario. Once all of this was situated, I glued the motor mount assembly into the airframe tube, and I used Aeropoxy E6209. And to be perfectly honest, moving forward, I'm probably going to avoid using this epoxy because it has a little bit of a tendency to run. Because fiberglass is mostly transparent, I could see through it and see all the epoxy that was running down from the top centering ring when I left it sitting overnight to cure. And yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. I like when my epoxy stays where I put it. Now, on the other hand, the tan epoxy you saw me using before is Aeropoxy E6279, which I really can't recommend enough. It's an actual aerospace grade structural adhesive. It is really, really strong and it cures really, really hard. Super easy to work with because it has a 1-to-1 mixing ratio either by weight or volume. Really the only downside is that it's quite expensive at about $400 per gallon or about $150 per quart. That's for both parts of the set, but it's still just a lot of money. So it's a really high quality epoxy, but it just costs a lot. After the motor mount was glued into the airframe and the epoxy was cured, I started bond prep for the fins and airframe for both bonding the fins to the motor tube and for doing fillets. So here's another sanding montage for you. For tacking the fins to the motor tube, I used JB Weld Quick Weld, and this is one of the epoxies I actually recommend most to people who are new and getting into the hobby. It's great because it's affordable and it's really accessible. You can find it at any hardware store. They sell it at Walmart. You can get it on Amazon. It's really all over the place. But it is extremely strong. I've personally sent a rocket that was built only with JB Weld to over Mach 2 in a minimum diameter M motor flight, so it's strong. Y'all know I like to keep it old school from time to time, so no fin guides on this build. I just used blue masking tape to keep the fins in place until the JB Quick cured. Once all the fins were on and the JB Quick was cured, I gave it a quick little sand one more time for all the surfaces for the fillets, just to make sure I didn't miss anything, and cleaned everything up with that 99.9% isopropyl alcohol once again. I did the fillets with the same 6279 Aeropoxy that I mentioned before, and I degassed it in a vacuum chamber before I used it for the rocket. I sort of misjudged the flow rate of this epoxy, so when I was getting it out of the bowl and putting it on the rocket to actually make the fillets, I really was introducing a bunch of air back into it. So the vacuum chamber was likely a moot point in this case, but you know, it happens sometimes. Using this epoxy for fillets is really, really nice because it smooths itself out so nice. It's pretty easy to work with and it's not that hard to get a hang of, but when it cures, it's very hard and doesn't sand very easily. So if you do end up using this stuff for fillets, make sure you're fairly precise with your fillet shaping, otherwise you're going to be in for a tough time. Hey, guess what time it is? Now, with all of that sanding out of the way, you know what sounded just phenomenal to me? More sanding. So I remasked the fillets and I used West System laminating epoxy filled with their 410 micro light filler. This stuff sands so perfect. If you've ever used super fill, it's just like that. But it's really nice because West System has a really long working time, so you can really sit there and make sure you're spreading it out as much as you can. That way you don't have to worry about rushing. You can get everything exactly where you want it, let it cure overnight, sand it smooth, then you've got yourself some perfect fillets. If you know me, you know that I will spend way more time than I should trying to get my fillets to look as nice as possible. Once the 410 cured, I sanded that, but I didn't shoot another sanding montage. I feel like you must be as sick of it as I am. This rocket is going to use head-end dual deploy, which means all of the electronics are going in the nose cone shoulder coupler, and the main parachute and harness will actually be in the nose cone itself. I decided to set it up this way because that leaves enough room for almost 4 feet of motor, which means my beloved AMW 75-7600 case will fit in there, and we can put some pretty brutal M motors in this rocket because I think it'll take them just fine. However, the 2 sections of tube are really convenient for travel and transport and storage, so I decided that I wasn't going to glue the 2 pieces together, and instead, I glued half of the coupler into the upper airframe tube. With JB Weld, I'm going to let that cure, and then it'll just be bolted to the lower section with steel hardware. That way I can still break it down and have it in nice little bite-sized pieces to fit in either one of my tiny cars. Now that everything's glued and ready, it's time to start painting, and I decided I was going to go with the traditional Patriot paint job that you see with all the pictures of them coming out of their launchers, the red and copper and white nose cone, sort of US Army Patriot livery. Knowing that I was going to have copper fins, I decided to just go for it and painted the fin section with bare metallic copper paint. That's BEHR, the brand. I've never used their aerosol before, but I have to say, it goes on really smooth and really nice. However, I'm used to pretty heavy coats with the Rust-Oleum 2-time stuff or actual automotive paint, so I got some runs. It happens to the best of us. So I threw it all up on the workbench and wet sanded it with 400 grit and tried again. That's how it goes sometimes, all right? You know, no one's perfect. Sometimes you wind up sanding paint you already did. And you know what? Spoiler alert, I did the same thing on the upper copper section. If you are familiar with my channel, you're probably familiar with the fact that I am fairly meticulous when it comes to scale stuff. I'm not like the most detail oriented, but I want things to at least look mostly correct, even if you look at them for a while. So fin shapes, sizes, upscales, downscales, and everything, I'm pretty meticulous about it, and that extends into the universe of scale paint jobs. So this is a little bit tedious, please bear with me. Okay folks, I want my Patriot's paint job to look at least mostly scale, so that's going to require some arithmetic. So what we're going to do here is a little bit of math. On this side, we're going to go with the dimensions of a true Patriot. So this is a MIM 104A. Google says it's 17.5 feet long, which is 210 inches. So we know that is the real length of the rocket. And I tried to find the most like direct from the side picture I could find of one. So there is some possibility of lens warp here affecting this, but we're going to get it as close to scale as possible. So the overall length in the picture is 2 5/16, so that's 2.3125. And that gives us a scale factor of 1 to 90.81. So that 90.81 is going to be our magic little number here for getting the figures for the real Patriot. But we're going to have to do some more math on this side because I don't have a full-scale Patriot. I have a 5.5-inch one. We know a real Patriot is 16 inches in diameter. So if we divide 5.5 by 16, that gives us, with some rounding, 34.4, which is going to be in percent. That means if you want to be real nerdy when you introduce my Patriot to people, if you're doing that for some reason, it's a 34.4% scale model. Now, most of it's going to be decals, but I do have to paint the copper sections onto the rocket. So all we're going to be measuring here for is the upper and lower copper sections. So we're going to put upper and lower, and then we're going to have to do some more math on this side, which I'll get to in a second. So the upper section is 3/8 of an inch. That's convenient. And we know that to be 0.375. So we multiply that by 90.81. And that gives us 34.1 inches. So on the real Patriot, this copper section here is 34.1 inches long. And the lower section is pretty much exactly 1/4 inch, which is really nice. So
0.25 times 90.81. And that gives us 22.7 inches. Again, with some rounding. We're going for really close, but not perfect here because, you know, is it exactly 5.5 inches outside diameter? No. Is everything going to be perfect? No, but we're going to at least try and make it look good. So we've got 34.1 times 0.344 to find the percentage there. And we'll do the same down here, times 0.344. That gives us 11.73 inches and 7.81 inches. So not the most convenient numbers. Well, actually that's 13/16. Yeah, 8125. So, but just for simplicity's sake, this upper one, we're going to do 11 3/4. Boom, that's going to be our final number for the Patriot, my Patriot, and then, well, we're going to put 7 13/16, but it's going to be difficult because it has to be masked between the fins. You can see the red paint comes down between the fins there, so I might end up just putting that at 7 3/4 as well, and we'll just call it a day, but we'll see once I actually get to that. But there you go. People have asked how I scale a paint job before, and that's a quick and easy way to do it. I highly recommend it. If you're doing a scale rocket, get it, you know, as close as you can. Just do the math. Do it for upscales too. You know, make things look right.
Okay, with all the arithmetic out of the way, it's time to start masking the thing. And for that lower section, it was a little bit tough, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I used my gridded cutting mat to cut some pieces of masking tape to the length that I needed them to be and used a straight edge to cut everything nice and straight. It wasn't too bad. I mean, I probably spent a good half hour masking just that lower section because I really wanted to make sure that it was super nice and all the lines were going to be crisp. And most importantly, I didn't want to do it again. For the upper section, I just used some pieces of regular 8.5 by 11 printer paper taped together as a straight edge to wrap around the tube and start the masking line. Sealed that up with masking tape, sealed all the paper lines up with masking tape, and then sprayed my little heart away. Overall, the paint job came out pretty good. The red transition to the copper, I knew was going to be a little bit of a problem because it's got pretty big fillets, and on the real Patriot, there's no fillets there. So there's a nice hard break between the fin and the airframe tube, so the masking lines are real simple there. I couldn't decide what to do, so I split the tape basically right down the center of the fillet. It looks a little bit goofy if you stare at it for too long, but it's all right. From 10 feet or more away, it looks great, so when it's 300 feet away getting ready to fly on an M motor, it looks phenomenal. After I let the paint cure for a few days, it was time to start cracking on all the fine little details of this thing, which mainly consisted of drilling all the holes for the hardware, installing the rail guides. I used stainless steel hardware for the rail buttons this time and used jam nuts on the back to really reinforce them. And of course, drilling holes in the bulk plates and setting up the electronics bay. The last aesthetic step was to install the decals that my friend Mark over at stickershock23.com made for me. He absolutely killed it on these things. And as always, awesome turnaround time, and managed to get me these decals before I flew the rocket, so it didn't have to fly looking mostly like a Patriot, but not all the way. I used a mixture of mostly isopropyl alcohol with a little bit of water and a single drop of dish soap in a spray bottle to wet apply these vinyl decals, especially because the upper section was a wrap that goes all the way around the tube. This buys you a good amount of time to slide everything around and situate it and make sure you have it exactly where you want it. However, if you use too much water, it can create a little bit of a problem where you're waiting a really long time for all the water to evaporate out before you peel it, or it will just keep bringing the decal back up. A heat gun can help you a lot with this scenario, but if you get it too hot, you start messing up the vinyl. So mostly isopropyl alcohol is what you want. Don't go too heavy on the water. And it's in the vinyl world, it's called application spray, and everyone has their own ratios and formulas and how to make it perfect. I've just kind of learned that I just mess with it until it works, and sometimes I overcook the water a little bit. But you can look it up and figure it out for yourself if you'd like to try this method. It is really effective though. For recovery, there was a little bit of an issue in that this rocket doesn't use an aluminum tip, even though it is a filament wound nose cone. It has a what looks like just epoxy tip or maybe a gel coat tip that's glued in place. That means there's no threaded tip for me to put a 1/4-20 eye bolt into and attach my shock cord to. So instead, I tied a hex nut to the end of my shock cord, dropped it in the tip of the nose, and then potted it in place with the same Aeropoxy 6279 epoxy. Really hope I'm saying that number the same every time. To get a little more flow rate out of it, I heated it up with a heat gun and it did make it pour really nicely, but beware, if you try that trick for fillets or whatever else you're trying to use it for, if you thin it out with heat, it makes it cure way faster. In fact, the curing time of that epoxy, I believe, is 6 to 8 hours, but if you cure it at 140 degrees, you can get a full cure in 45 minutes. So be careful if you start using heat to apply stuff. The lower section of the recovery setup uses a 1-bad Hawk 3-loop harness attached to that 1-inch Kevlar leader I glued to the motor tube at the beginning of the build. For the drogue parachute, I just used a standard Top Flight 12-inch chute. The upper section is a little bit more complicated.
Okay, forgive the mess a little bit. For those who aren't following me on Facebook and stuff, I purchased an EP3 Honda Civic Si. If you're a car person, you'll probably think, wow, that's cool. If you're not a car person, you'll probably think, why? Goofy shifter though, look at that thing. Anyway, my beloved pink and purple Cert 3 medium for the main. I'm going to tie the deployment bag to the shock cord. Yes, I am going to use the bag, but it's not going to be a free bag setup like the big ones. So the parachute is going to be connected up here right near the nose cone, which I potted in epoxy. And then, so while the nose cone's pulling itself away, in theory, what's going to happen is this deployment bag is going to reach its full extension. As the nose cone continues flying away, it's going to gracefully pull this main chute out and flip the nose cone down just like that, and then we're good.
Fun fact though, the main section, that piece of shock cord is from my 3-inch Punisher that unfortunately met its demise. Speaking of my 3-inch Punisher, I opted to go pretty hard on this rocket's first flight because I had an Aerotech M1315 sitting around. It's a 5-grain 75mm M motor, and it's a pretty aggressive first flight for this rocket considering it takes up most of the rocket. Pretty big motor, but they're really, really cool. The dilemma here is that that rocket motor is really old. It was from 2001, and I planned on flying the rocket at FAR. If you're familiar with my channel, you might know that the last time I flew an old motor at FAR, well, it didn't go that well. But fortune favors the brave, and this rocket is ready to fly. So I loaded that M1315 up, took it out to FAR. So, lighting another old motor. How'd this go?
How far out is it? It's landing in 3-2.
It's down, yeah.
All right, I see it. See if all the fins are there. It looked like it was coming down a little fast. Kind of wild how green everything is out here in the Mojave right now. Just got a ton of rain. Hey, from here it looks like all the fins are attached. I think we're chilling. Yeah, look, there's a motor case in there. Everything's here. I'm super stoked my deployment bag solution worked good there. That's rad. Shout out my friend Joe Hill for selling me this awesome pink and purple Cert 3 medium. But I think we're gonna have to go up to a large on this guy. Came down a little quick. But overall, call that a success. 12,543 feet is what the higher of the two altimeters is saying, and everyone knows the higher one is the one that's correct.
Just a little correction I want to add, actually, because I had the Silicdyne Reprix GPS tracker on this rocket as well, and it said it went 13,038 feet, or about 3,974 meters. So that's what I'm going with. The highest one is always right. Plus, in theory, GPS should be a lot more accurate than a barometer reading. All in all, this flight was an awesome success, and I'm so stoked to have a big Patriot in my collection. It's a really cool rocket, and I've been a big fan of the Patriot for a long, long time. I had the Estes one when I was really young. Unfortunately, like I said, this particular Patriot kit is discontinued. However, our friends over at Wildman Rocketry have a 2.6 inch, 5 inch, and even 11.5 inch diameter fiberglass Patriot kit. Or if you want to go the cardboard or phenolic route, our friends over at Lock Precision have a 4 inch, 5.5 inch, and 7.5 inch Patriot kit available as well. All of those super awesome rockets. So you can have the same size rocket, it'll just weigh a lot less, and it costs a whole lot less. I think they're under 200 bucks, which is a really good price for a really cool rocket. I want to say a big thank you to my friend Robert for selling me this kit. He kind of knows my affliction with the Patriot, and even though the rocket had been discontinued, he had one sitting around and was clearing house, so he offered it to me first, and I immediately took the chance to buy it, of course. Before I get out of here, I want to say thank you to everybody for checking out the Rocket Logs app on iOS. It has surpassed 100 downloads, which is just crazy. It's doing so much better than I ever anticipated, and there's a ton of kind words and feedback about how much people are loving it. If you haven't checked out the Rocket Logs app, please go check it out on iOS. I know Android people, I'm sorry. In this video, I logged it. I logged my flight on my Android phone with Rocket Logs. Unfortunately, Google's procedures to getting an app public when you're a new publisher is a little bit more strict than Apple's. I'm trying very hard, and it's going to be out literally the moment it can be. I know, don't feel left out. I am an Android person as well. If you want to see projects like this happening in real time, behind the scenes pictures and behind the scenes videos and clips and everything else that I'm working on, there's a lot of cool rocket stuff in the works, as you can see right there behind me. Check out my Patreon at patreon.com/rocketvlogs. Thank you so much to all of my Patreon supporters, as always, whose names are scrolling across the screen right now. If you want to support my channel, but you can't or don't want to support the Patreon or support me financially, that's perfectly fine. Press the like button. Share this video with your friends. It does a lot more to help the channel grow than you might think. Also, I have merch available. The link will be in the description. It's my merch as well as the merch for my podcast, the Anti-Gravity Group podcast, which you should listen to if you like rockets, by the way. It's just me and my friends rambling about rockets and cool stuff. We do a bunch of fun scenarios and games, and we have some cool guests on, like Julian Donat, who just did a minimum diameter N5800 that went over Mach 4, Bryce Chanis and Amy Howell, who are both Tripoli Board of Directors members. We just had Austin from Half Cat Rocketry on, teaching us all about how to make liquid rocket motors safely. It's a really fun podcast. You should go check it out. You can check that out in the description. It's on YouTube as well as pretty much every major podcast streaming platform. If you want the merch delivered by Christmas, the last day to order it is December 11th. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to an episode of Rocket Vlogs. Build-cember is going down. I built and flew this rocket, and I'm feeling pretty gratified. But I've got a few more rockets that I plan on building before Christmas. So press the subscribe button, press the like button. You can follow me on Instagram at BigB1011 or at Rocket Vlogs Official. Follow me on Facebook at Braden Carlson or Rocket Vlogs Official. Thank you all so much for watching this video. My name is Braden Carlson, and I will see you all next time.